The OIG reviewed the funding of traffic court because it's a part of a series in the criminal justice agencies. We're trying to figure out how much money goes into each one of these agencies and what they spend it on.
So one of the reasons that traffic court was one of the earlier courts that we are looking at over this series of funding analyses is that it's the place where most New Orleanians encounter the justice system. Not everyone is going to appear as a defendant in criminal district court, but a lot of people do get traffic tickets.
It's the only traffic court in America to begin with. It's an unusual structure, and they raise a significant amount of revenue for the city, approximately $11 million a year. That's about $4 or $5 million more than they cost. Originally it was set up that the city council had complete authority over it, but over the past 40 years, amendments made to the state law in the legislature undermined the city council's authority over budget. The state law essentially authorizes the court to grow as big as the judges want, regardless of other financial needs of the city. We want the city council to determine the budget for the court. Now, the court's not just any other city department, so that needs to be taken into consideration, their responsibilities. But the way it does now, there are perverse incentives. There's a structural conflict of interest. The judges get more money for the court, for their employees, if they increase the fees and fines. There's a famous case, Toomey v. Ohio. Back in the Prohibition era, a court in a small town, a judge, actually the mayor, would roll his bench out into the highway and hold court whenever the city coffers needed some replenishment. So in that case, the Supreme Court found that it's just not ethical. There's a structural conflict of interest there, and the courts should not rely on fees and fines they impose for funding the court's operations.
In 2012, traffic court judges were responsible for raising over 80% of their revenue. That meant that every defendant a judge found guilty, the more money the court could collect, the more employees he could hire, the more raises he could give to his employees. And that is a substantial conflict of interest. The basic role of a court is to provide justice to citizens. And in order to provide justice, they need to have adequate funding. The court has a good clearance rate, which would indicate that it's got adequate funding. But the clearance rate is really masking an enormous backlog.
There are over 200,000 open cases in the court's system, so clearly no one was doing case management. There's a new system that was put in at the end of 2014, and we hope that the court takes the title case management seriously. We tried to look at the staffing because the way it's done, it's hard to relate it in any way to volume, workload, et cetera. But we really couldn't because the court did not cooperate.
We looked at reports over the past 30 years that have all consistently said that there were too many employees at traffic court. We developed a survey that was web-based to give to the employees to find out what they were doing, how they were spending their time, how many hours they worked. We actually got a very low response rate to that survey. Only 8 of 64 employees responded. When we brought that to the attention of the judges and asked if we could interview people in person, the judges refused us access. One of the main objectives of this study was to understand if the court was appropriately using public funds. We just couldn't find out. There was just not the data available. There are national organizations that suggest standards for how courts should measure their performance. They can use these to justify their spending or to make funding requests to legislative authorities. This court just doesn't have the capability of tracking.
We have an impossible budget situation. It's much like the jail, right? The city has to pay whatever it is, but the city has no control over the court. And, you know, they're not going to do it, but if the court said, we need another $100 million, theoretically, following the law, the city would have to pay it. I would like to see budgetary authority returned to the city council. We think that that oversight will cause the court to be more efficient. As part of that, the court has to submit budget requests that are based on rational defensive needs. And in order to do that, they're going to have to measure their performance. And if they do that, it'll help the court fine-tune its operations and improve effectiveness.